Line 33 of an 1841 ship manifest records a man as Plat Hamilton. The same page lists 41 enslaved people transported from Richmond to New Orleans aboard the Brig Orleans. The man on line 33 was Solomon Northup, a free black man from New York. His 1853 title page says he was kidnapped in Washington City in 1841 and rescued in 1853. The manifest preserved the identity imposed on him by the slave trade. Northup's own account restored his name and the life that entry tried to erase. This is the Unburied Record. Like, subscribe, and comment, telling us your thoughts about this aspect of the American slave trade. In spring 1841, Northup lived in New York as a free black man. Freedom was his legal status, though the law did not give black citizens equal protection or an equal chance to be believed. Proof of freedom could decide whether a free black person was recognized, detained, or pushed towards sale. Papers helped carry that proof, but paper was only as effective as the officials and courts willing to honor it. South of New York, Washington was both the national capital and a city where slavery and domestic slave trading still operated. Traders, buyers, and transport routes connected the city to a larger market that sent enslaved people south. That market offered profit to kidnappers and severe legal obstacles to black people trying to prove that they were free. Northup would enter Washington carrying evidence of his status. Within days, he would be confined without it. Before any captor entered his account, Solomon Northup had a family, a working life, and a place in his community. He was married and the father of 3 children. Elizabeth was about 9, Margaret about 7, and Alonzo 5 in the spring of 1841. Northup's work followed Saratoga's seasons. During the visiting season, he found work around hotels and public houses. In winter and between other jobs, he earned money playing the violin. Paid performance was part of the working life he already knew. In late March 1841, Saratoga's busy season had not yet begun, and Northup was looking for work. A short performance job would have sounded like familiar work, not danger. That was when 2 men approached him with what they described as a short performance job. They gave the names Merrill Brown and Abram Hamilton, though Northup later doubted those were their real names. They said they were connected to a traveling circus and needed a violinist. Northup agreed to go with them. His account traces the trip from Saratoga to Albany, then New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington. Before continuing south, he obtained papers in New York that proved his free status. Our sources do not include a surviving copy of those papers. Their role in Northup's account is clear. They were meant to show that he traveled as a free citizen. Northup's own account documents a job offer used to persuade him to travel. The broader record documents free black people kidnapped and sold into slavery. Northup's reported route gives one specific sequence, not a template for every victim. The 2 men led him to Washington, but the accepted evidence does not verify who they really were. In Washington, Northup described becoming severely ill or insensible. He could not remember what happened next. He later awoke confined and chained. His money and free papers were gone. Northup then faced a second attack, the denial of his identity. In his narrative, the imposed name is spelled Plat. His claims to freedom were rejected inside a system that could punish a black man for insisting on the truth of his own life. Without his papers, his word stood against people who controlled the room, the confinement, and the route south. The kidnapping worked by forcing a saleable identity over a documented one. The next records would carry that imposed name farther from New York. Northup's kidnapping belonged to a documented and recurring danger faced by free black people before the Civil War. Public historians sometimes call the wider pattern the reverse Underground Railroad. The phrase describes kidnappers and traffickers carrying free people into slavery, often towards southern markets. It does not describe one organization or one method used in every case. Northup's reported job offer was one documented route into this larger danger. The domestic slave trade connected the Upper South to markets farther south. Federal and state law could provide cover, while racism shaped whose testimony officials accepted. Families trying to recover a kidnapped person could face the same legal barriers that made the original seizure possible. Freedom papers might be destroyed, dismissed, or separated from the person whose status they proved. Exact victim totals cannot be recovered from the surviving record. Many people sold south disappeared from the documents available to their families and to historians. Missing records prevent a number, but they do not erase the documented pattern. His vanished papers and imposed name show how quickly legal freedom could be made difficult to prove. The route south then placed that denial inside the ordinary paperwork of the slave trade. The transport chain moved to Northup from Confinement in Washington to Richmond, then aboard the Brig Orleans toward New Orleans. The Richmond collector approved the manifest on April 27, 1841. The ship was checked in New Orleans on May 24th, 27 days later. Northup says 40 people were put aboard in Richmond. At night, they were driven into the hold, and the hatch was barred above them. By day, Northup distributed food and water. He recounts a violent storm, smallpox aboard the ship, and Robert's death before they reached New Orleans. He also managed to send a letter home, but he could not name where he would be taken after New Orleans. The letter did not bring an immediate rescue. In 27 days, the ship carried him from Richmond to New Orleans, farther from the family and witnesses who knew he was free. The manifest is an archival record of that Richmond to New Orleans passage. On line 33, the spelling changes from the narrative's Plat to the manifest's Plat Hamilton. That source-specific difference stays visible because each spelling belongs to a different record. The manifest records 41 enslaved people on a domestic trade route. It corroborates Northup's transport, an imposed name, though it cannot prove every event that put him on the ship. In New Orleans, Northup was sold under the imposed identity to William Ford. The historic New Orleans collection identifies a notarial act dated June 23, 1841, for the sale of Harry, Plat, and Drady. The sale record listed them under the names Harry, Plat, and Drady. New Orleans was the market. From there, Northup's captivity moved inland to central Louisiana, around the Red River and Bayou Boeuf. His sale to Ford began the long middle of the story. Northup's account of William Ford differs in tone from what he later wrote about other enslavers. The legal and human fact remains that Ford claimed ownership of a free man and controlled his labor. Northup used his skill as a carpenter during this period. Skill could change the work assigned to him, but it did not restore his right to choose an employer, leave, or return home. In winter 1842, Ford sold Northup to John M. Tibeats. In a sequence Northup connected to Ford's debts and his own value as a carpenter. A financial problem belonging to Ford became another forced transfer for Northup. After Tibeats tried to whip him over a dispute about carpentry work, Northup fought back. Tibeats returned with Cook and Ramsey, overseers from nearby plantations, and the three men bound Northup and prepared to hang him. Chapin was Ford's overseer and had exclusive charge of the Bayou Boeuf plantation, where the attack took place. In Ford's absence, Chapin ordered the men to stop, calling the act murder, and warning that Ford still held a $400 mortgage on Northup. Ownership, debt, and white authority still determined where he could go and who could claim his labor. Tibeats later sold Northup to Edwin Epps. Under Epps, Northup entered the longest period of his Louisiana captivity. The setting had moved far beyond the New Orleans market into the plantation regions of central Louisiana. Northup's account slows down there because captivity was made of repeated days, assigned work, and measured output. Cotton cultivation organized much of the labor he described. The crop was picked, carried, and weighed. Each person's output could be measured against an expected quota. If an enslaved person's cotton weighed less than the assigned quota, Epps could punish that person for the shortfall. The scale did more than record cotton. It made each day's required output a judgment enforced by violence. Northup wrote that he failed as a raw hand in cotton picking, he was moved into other labor, another example of the enslaver assigning work according to use and output. A change of task could affect the shape of a day, but Epps still controlled the time, labor, and threat behind it. This is how the 12-year middle has to be understood. Captivity was sustained through a labor system that repeated itself long after any single violent event ended, returning at each weighing and in every new assignment. Ownership decided who worked, quotas set the demand, weighing supplied the measure, and punishment enforced the result. The system demanded skill and endurance while Epps controlled the work. Northup remained the same husband, father, musician, and free New Yorker whose name appeared on the 1853 title page. Epps's authority depended on forcing that identity out of legal recognition. Years passed under that imposed order, measured in seasons of work and repeated decisions controlled by Epps. Northup observed its routines closely enough to describe who assigned the work, how output was measured, and where violence entered the process. His account preserves slavery as an organized economic practice, seen from inside by a man compelled to perform it. The people around him were never merely parts of that system. Their work, decisions, and acts of care remain visible whenever the record allows them to be, and they belong inside the account of those years. On Epps's plantation, Northup lived and worked alongside Patsey. Northup wrote that she was the most remarkable cotton picker on Bayou Boeuf. That skill belonged to Patsey, though Epps claimed its value and controlled the conditions under which she worked. She lived inside the power exercised by Epps and Mistress Epps. Northup records extreme violence and exploitation directed at her within that household and labor system. Her skill was demanded inside a system where others claimed ownership of her labor in person. Northup's account documents Patsey's skill, exploitation, and violence, but it cannot tell us the life she would have chosen for herself. Northup also recorded choices enslaved people made to protect themselves and one another. He described Celeste hiding in a swamp to avoid punishment. He shared his scanty allowance with her while she remained concealed. The act was small enough to escape the grand language usually attached to resistance. It was also dangerous, practical, and necessary. Food and secrecy helped another person remain beyond an enslaver's immediate reach. The record supports mutual aid between Northup and Celeste, not an organized network with a name or fixed route. Northup's own survival also depended on concealment. He hid his literacy and his free identity because revealing either could expose him to danger. Silence protected the knowledge that the name Plat did not belong to him. Literacy still gave him a possible route toward home, if he could find someone trustworthy enough to use it. That caution survived long enough for him to trust Bass. Survival required protecting information until it could reach a trustworthy person. Northup eventually told Samuel Bass his real name and that he had been kidnapped. Bass wrote a letter to Parker and Perry, two men Northup knew in Saratoga. When it reached New York, Parker and Perry sent it to Ann Northup. The letter showed where to look, but officials still needed proof that Northup was free and legal authority to bring him home. Ann sent Governor Washington Hunt a formal request for her husband's return. People who knew Northup in New York gave sworn statements that he was free. Governor Hunt appointed Henry B. Northup as New York's agent in the case. Henry was a New York lawyer from the family that had enslaved Solomon's father. That history explains why Henry and Solomon shared a last name. Henry traveled south with the state commission and the sworn statements. In Louisiana, he found Bass and learned that Epps held Solomon under the name Plat. Henry and a local lawyer began legal proceedings, then went with the sheriff to Epps's plantation. On January 4th, 1853, Epps surrendered Solomon to Henry after about 12 years in slavery. The surrender record ordered that Solomon be restored to freedom and returned to New York. The rescue began with the identity Northup protected and finally shared with Bass. His missing papers had left him unable to prove who he was in Washington. This time, letters, sworn statements, and state authority proved his identity. Officials now recognized what he had said from the beginning. He was Solomon Northup, a free man from New York. When When Solomon reached Glens Falls, Margaret met him first. She was now a young woman with a child of her own. Elizabeth and Anne soon joined them. 12 years had passed since he left Elizabeth, Margaret, and Alonzo in 1841. 12 years later, he came home and put the whole story in writing. His book was published in 1853 under his own name, Solomon Northup, a citizen of New York. The ship manifest had recorded him as Plat Hamilton. His account put Solomon Northup back into the record. The sources for this episode are listed in the description. Share your thoughts on Solomon Northup's story in the comments, and subscribe to the Unburied Record.